A landmark in Dover is Warther's Museum. It's been here for decades. This is one place that you really should come see. Why? Come on inside. This is where Ernest and Frida Warther lived. This was Mooney Warther's old shop. We're on our way up. Very pretty. In the old house. This is Mooney and Frida. This is the button house. Frida created these herself with her own buttons and thread and needle. Fascinating, right? I think what Frida did was Offthetrails. Many of these hand-painted ceramic buttons Frida brought from Switzerland as a child. Lovely gardens. Let's go in. This is Mr. Warther's original workshop. He built it in 1912. Notice all the Indian arrowheads. A collage of pliers. This is a meteor that was found in the area.
The house would be built by 1912. They're ready to move in, and they would live here all of their lives and raise 5 children in this home. Up until 5 years ago, this was a private residence. The eldest daughter, Florence, had been living there. When she passed away, the family began to restore the home. And to tease him, they said that another dumb Swiss had been taken in. Down below is a mill stream, and people said, "Mooney, you bought a canal for a backyard." Well, Mooney, being Mooney, plays off of this and renames Carl Avenue Dumb Street. He said the further down the street you went, the dumber the residents got, and his was the last house on the street. Ivory, he'd take out all these white bone pieces and carve identical ivory pieces. He'd replace the bone with the ivory, but the one on the mantle is one of 2 originals with bone in it. Here's hometown in England. Mooney had a 2nd grade education. Frida had a 6th grade education. They would continue to informally educate themselves through reading anything and everything they could get their hands on. Shakespeare is one of their favorite authors. Mooney had his carvings, but Frida had her buttons. She collected buttons her entire life, from the time she was about your age all the way up until her 90s. She'd collect 73,282 buttons. If you've been out to the button house, what you see out there, that's not even close to half of her collection. She would categorize them by stringing them up according to size, shape, color, or style, and then hang them on the picture rail. Whatever didn't get strung, well, she'd put in jars, boxes, trunks. There are buttons in storage everywhere. A postcard home. You put the address on the front and a little message on the back. If you've ever wanted to read somebody else's mail, today's your chance. You'd put a 2 or 4 cent stamp on there, drop it in the mail, and away it would go. This one, with a $2 airmail stamp, went all the way to Bombay, India. Mooney had a friend who worked for Firestone, and he never knew if his buddy received it until he came back to the States, and he brought it with him just to prove that Mooney's wooden postcard had made it all the way to the other side of the world. This is a mill located about 9 blocks from here. He would work at this mill for 21.5 years. He'd quit, work for the railroad, and then spend the rest of his life making his living as a knife maker. The knife business would be born while he's working here. At this point in time, there's no such thing as unemployment. When the mill would shut down, he had to have some way to supplement his income, and so he began a knife business. Over here we have an angry foreman. He's pounding his fist. He's firing his chief engineer, Henry, for falling asleep in the pit again. Foot races and the competitions. And over there in the corner, we have a treasure chest, a doll bed, a jewelry box. He made those for his daughter, Florence, as well as for the other girls for birthdays and Christmas. Mooney always said that girls were special. But boys, they could make their own. Sorry, boys, you're out of luck. All 4,500 of these pieces back together, much like a puzzle, you would have an identical Empire State Express. We had 5 of these locomotives. We figured we could sacrifice one to show you what goes into a model of this size, from the larger pieces all the way down to the tiny ivory nuts, rivets, and bolts. Mooney never sold us. Every time he'd start a new project, she'd get a new piece of jewelry. She'd wear that for 8, 9, or 10 months, and then one day she'd go to her jewelry box and it would be missing. She'd then go to whatever locomotive he was working on, find the lantern, and there would be the red or green stones from the missing piece of jewelry. So this was work. Mooney will purchase his very first elephant tusk. He's so proud of it, he has his picture taken with it. Can anybody tell me which way the wind is blowing? The man did not have a bad hair day. He had a bad hair life. When he'd buy his tusks, he'd only buy the kind that have the brown bark. It meant that the elephant had died of old age. It hadn't been poached for its ivory. Ironically, he would die in 1973. That's the same year the embargo on elephant ivory would go into effect. Poaching increased and the price of ivory shot through the roof. 13, Mooney's coming home from work, and he'll have a flash, a vision in his head of a block of wood that's shaped like this. And Mooney figures, if I place 31,000 cuts perfectly, not one mistake, not one single shaving, you fan it out, you'll have 511 pairs of pliers. Mooney will carve that. It took him 64 hours. An hour a day for 64 days. His first truck until it wears out. He'll buy a second truck, a bigger truck, and he'll drive that one until the horse won. Second model from the end in the back is a DeWitt Clinton. That's that model that Mooney made 97 years ago that's still running, once again using that special Arguto wood. An old Shakespeare, the Bible, his encyclopedias have the bindings worn off of them. He has read them so many times. Engineers have gone over all of his carvings. They have tried to find a mistake and they can't do it. His carvings are perfect and flawless in every way. And the V are independent characters and the rest of the word is one solid piece of ivory. Mooney would carve the word in ivory. He'd carve it in wood. He'd put a little bit of glue on the back of that ivory and then press fit the word into the wood. So the favorite parts of the tour, because now I get to ask you folks a question. He'll carve Lindbergh's parachute, his bust, the plain Spirit of St. Louis, and then wrapping around the base are the headlines announcing the flight. Mooney would carve this cane in 13 to 14 hours, and that's less than half the time it took Lindbergh to fly across the ocean. More in Ohio. This was one of his least favorite carvings. It's a streamliner. He said it looked too much like a diesel. He didn't like diesels. He said diesels were ugly and they had the personality of a tomato worm. 152 pieces. He carved that in 1933. He said he could never do anything better. If you look at the detail work on the front of the engine, the piping, the rivets. From the front of the engine to the very center, as it's on my side, it's turning around, you'll see a 3-loop bell rope going back. That is one solid piece of ivory. That's the longest bell rope he ever carved in his life. Ivory is hard to work with. It's fragile. It's brittle. It has a tendency to snap. Mooney wouldn't carve on Sundays. He said, it's close by to here. This was the last of the great steamers. It's as tall as a 2-story building, a 600-ton locomotive that burned 22 tons of coal an hour. The wheels were 6 foot in diameter. Mooney would carve this when he's 67, finishing on the morning of his 68th birthday. He figured that was a great time for him to retire. At that point, they're making diesels, and he's not about to carve a diesel. He takes a couple years off, and a little more after that happened. Mooney's a young boy. It inspired him, and he never forgot it. He came back to carve it in the 70s. This is the Empire State Express. It would set a new speed record, blowing the old one completely out of the water. 112.5 miles an hour.
Is there shopping? Of course. Well, that was some tour.